Hey
Good morning or
everybody,
afternoon.
welcome back. I thought I was starting it, so good morning or afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. Welcome back to another Timer Tip Tuesday. Uh, Matt Avery and Soren Larson with you this afternoon or morning, and we're going to be talking today about some new data check features that we're really excited with version 5 of RaceDay scoring and some things coming soon on the horizon. Thanks again for coming. Today we're going to be talking about data checks, some new features we have. Again, if you are unfamiliar with GoToWebinar, we have a questions and comments panel on the side that you can use to send in any questions that you may have or comments. Feel free to use that during the session. I have a few folks in the back end ready and waiting to answer any questions you have, and we'll bring them up as we go if needed. Also, the session is recorded, and we'll be putting it on our YouTube channel afterwards. So if you missed something or you came late today, don't worry. We'll always have it recorded, and you'll be able to go and look at it on our YouTube channel within a day or two. So let's talk through what we're going to talk about today. Talking about data checks and data action refresher. What's the difference between the two? Why you might want to use one or the other. We're going to talk about default data checks, which is a new feature with version 5. Using data checks more efficiently, understanding how to use participant search filters versus raw read search filters, and then a few examples of different ways you can use data checks. And then we'll wrap it up with some questions. Okay, let's do a quick refresher on data checks and data actions. What's the difference? So they're very kind of similar, but the way that we kind of like to break them up is data actions happen automatically, data checks happen manually. So the changes that are actually occurring will be different based on what you choose. With data actions, it considers all participants regardless of scored events, unless you filter them out. That has a trigger set by participant and raw read filters that acts when those conditions are met. So the trigger is basically what action has to happen in order for this data to change. And it could be, hey, this participant was edited, therefore go and update them if their conditions are now met. Or, hey, I got a read at the finish for this person that met the conditions about the raw read, and now I'm going to go make that change to them. It changes a piece of participant registration data, typically like their corral or the registration event. And most importantly, it happens automatically in the background without you needing to do anything. It only fires once when conditions are met for that participant. It won't try and change them again after. That reduces any issues of people flipping back and forth if they meet both conditions at the same time. It's not reversible unless you set it up with this in mind. There's ways to kind of reverse things if needed. Data checks, on the other hand, they consider, well, all participants regardless of scored event, again, unless you filter them out, they have the same conditions as the data action, like the participant and raw read filters, but they do not act automatically. So you have to manually say that you want to apply these changes. One cool thing about data checks is that it does output a list of participants who meet the conditions, so the parameters you set up. That's a nice, in my opinion, improvement over data actions, is it'll give you like a preview of who would be changed. You can select all, none, or specific participants to act on and change a single piece of registration data. So you could say, hey, I can see all of these people met the conditions, but I know this one was an outlier, and I really only want these few. And then you can apply those changes right there. And then data checks now show up on the new data check widget on the home tab. So they're very convenient and easy to get to. Additionally, we have default data checks because we have curated a few different things that commonly happen in timing events, and we've identified those and made default ones for you. So you'll be able to find the most heavily utilized ones very, very easily without having to do anything in advance. So when should you use data checks and data actions? You should use data actions if it's impossible to meet the condition accidentally. So this is like you really know for certain that if anybody gets a read at any time at this location way out on the marathon course, they should be moved to the marathon. There's no possible scenario that you could have where someone would be walking over there unless they were actually supposed to be running the marathon. Next, it's an automatic move no matter what. You don't want to think about it. There's no exceptions, just do it. It should happen in the background without any intervention. You are using it to fill in non-scoring. So now let's talk about data checks, when you want to use those. You're looking to assess whether or not to act on a participant. Not everyone who meets the criteria should be moved. You're checking something on the fly. Maybe it's not you want to change data, but you just want to look into some data or some people who meet some condition. Or you're using it in concert with a data action and custom fields to expand your checks. So you could do something like, use a data action to set some data, a custom field maybe, and then have a data check based on that to see, hey, show me everyone who was seen on the marathon course based on there being a read out there at the split point for them. And you may want to use that for any number of different things. Some examples, people who might have joined the early start corral. People missed a turnaround split, but it's possible they just missed the read. Okay, moving on to data check reports. So this is a new area on the dashboard that you may have noticed since updating RaceDay scoring. It'll show you anyone who meets the criteria of data check, both default and anyone that you have created yourself. You can click on the actual counts and it'll bring you directly to the report itself, and you can interact with it. You can make changes to it if you'd like to. Additionally, if you click the header, the word data check reports, it'll bring you all the way over to the data check reports page where you can access all of them. So this will only show you data check reports that actually have participants in them.
So as the time of this webinar, we have 4 default data checks. We have missing gender, missing age, suspicious times, and missed splits. Missing gender and missing age are pretty self-explanatory. If there's no value in either if in one of those fields, it would return those participants. Suspicious times takes a little bit more explanation. So if you go and expand this, you can edit this from the default. And what a suspicious time is in this report is anyone with an age graded time over 90%. So this uses age grading times to show anyone who ran extremely fast. For reference, a person who's under 34, over 18, who's male and who ran a half marathon in like 105 or 106 is about 90% age grading. So if someone is running an age graded time, they're either very, very fast, or potentially they registered for the longer event and ran the shorter event. So this is a really good way of just kind of seeing if someone is maybe in the wrong course. It's especially useful if you had, say, a 5K and 10K that started at the same time and you didn't have any splits on the course. It's a really good way to kind of see who needs evaluating. It's also very useful as a data check because you're not automatically acting on them. They may legitimately be that fast, or maybe you don't have a certified course and the course is a little bit short and everybody's age graded time is subsequently faster than normal. You can adjust this number as needed. So if you are in a situation where maybe you have a very fast elite field, or maybe the course is a little bit short, you could raise that to be 95%. Or if you had a trail race where in general it's tougher conditions and the average pace is much slower, you can decrease that to get people to populate on that report. You don't need to populate that, but it's just a good way of checking, especially because normally when you're checking the top 10 or so, you're not seeing the older participants. This is a really good way of evaluating their performances. Missed splits does require segments to be created. And so the way missed splits works is that if an earlier segment is not completed, but a later segment does get a used read or an occurrence, the system knows that there's a missed segment. You can also go in here if you'd like to and filter for specific segments using the contains operation or even exclude others. So this is really useful to see if a participant maybe just missed a read, or maybe they missed multiple segments, and help you evaluate maybe if they ran the wrong course, if they shorted the course, or if you're starting to see a lot of participants who have all missed the same split. Maybe you're having some data issues there. Maybe people are going around the split, or maybe some people have kind of missed part of the course completely. So it's a really good evaluation tool, not just for participant performance, but also for equipment and for possible on-course issues. And this back to Avery for the upcoming.
All right, let's see if my voice breaks up at all. Hopefully, it's just the video that's causing that. So you guys let me know if I'm breaking up again. So some new things that are coming soon with data checks. We're going to keep improving the data checks as we go. We think it's a really great feature. A big thing that we're doing right now is the ability to import and export data check reports between races. So once you get one built up for a triathlon that you really like, it works very well for you. It's like a wave jumper data check or something like that. That you want to use in all of your triathlons, you'd be able to export your data check and move it over to a different race. So that'll be helpful if you are starting to really get into these and want to use them in more of your events without having to set them up every single time. Next, the participant edit view right now, when you click a name on the individual within a data check, it brings up a page that you can edit some but not all information about a participant. So you can make changes to their event, you can change their name, you can do things like that. But specifically, you can't change their status flags, so DNQ, drop, and so on. So we're changing this out so that it goes over to their full edit page in RaceDay scoring, so you can access all of the features you'd normally be able to. So we're just changing out where you land when you click a name, so it looks like everything else in the application. Next is a new default. We're going to add a way to identify participants who are missing a start read but have finished, or they have a finished read. So this will be able to make it easier for you to find participants who missed their start, but we know have finished. And next, we have a new thing coming soon in the on the dashboard, or on the toolbar, I should say, is the data issues indicator up there. We're migrating away from using data issues as a way to keep track of who's missing, gender, who's missing chip, who's missing whatever. It's a very old system, and so we're starting to migrate away from that. And the first step in doing so is going to be showing a little tab, on when you hover over this in the toolbar, it'll actually show you that same component from the dashboard widget. So you'll be able to check in on your data checks from any screen. So whether you're on the dashboard, or you're in scored events, or you're checking out reports, you'd be able to access that toolbar and double check to see if there's anybody missed splits on course and so on and so forth, and make those changes on the fly. So it should be very helpful if you're using data checks a lot.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about how to set up data checks. So the first piece of a data check is the participant search filter. So the participant search filter can select any piece of registration data as well as scoring data. So for example, you could easily search for someone whose age is greater than or equal to 40, and it would return everyone 40 and above. You could also easily search for someone whose 5K split occurrence one time of day was less than or equal to 7:15 a.m. It is important to keep in mind that scored event specific filters, such as the 5K split, would automatically not be looking at participants outside of the event they're set up for. So if you have a 5K split for the half marathon and a 5K split for the marathon, they're not technically the same field because they're specific to the scored event they're set up for. That's just something to keep in mind when you set these out, so that you're not getting false positives. It is great to use did not start equals no, which would mean everybody who started, or did not finish equals no, which would be everyone who has a valid finish. These can really help focus the report on just participants you want to assess. When you are setting up things with the search filters, it is kind of nice to go step by step and say like, okay, I want to look at everyone in everyone who started. Okay, it returns that. And now everyone who started ends over 40. Okay, this works. And you can step through things there as you do that without having to save and leave that area. You can just click the search. It's also important to understand in these operations that what we're talking about with those when you're using these filters. So on the right there is a list of operations: is not, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, null, not null, starts with, and contains. So the one that's probably the most important to understand there is the difference between is and is not. So if you're saying an event is the 5K, that is different than saying is not the 10K. So you can kind of see on this Venn diagram that, is not the 10K is not just people who are not the 5K, but it's also, it's not a great Venn diagram, but people who are null and blank. And just a reminder, always test your filters. You don't really want to be flying blind on that. And you can test these without data in them pretty easily. The other component of data actions is the raw read search filter. And the raw read filters are pretty much exactly what they sound like. They're filters that operate on the raw reads rather than the participant registration data. So unlike that participant search, these do require several different selections. For example, if you just chose like a timestamp greater than 6 a.m., that would be any timestamp anywhere, any read anywhere greater than 6 a.m. So you do need to cut that down by including a filter for location or stream name for it to be useful. It's also important to understand when you use a timestamp filter, a timestamp is any read that is seen by that filter. So if you want to use only people with a used read on a location, you do need to set a second raw read filter that says used is yes. The same is true for occurrences. It's just best to test these conditions before using them. And it's also a good reminder, why data actions can be a little bit dangerous if they're firing automatically and you haven't tested them all the way. So, keep in mind, we'll cover a really good example later, but if you were to say like, oh, used occurrence, but that was being held out by either gap factor or minimum segment time, that would not be returning participants the way that you'd expect them to. So we've got a couple examples here that are built out, and we've stepped through them here so that you can see kind of how they're built, and then also extrapolate into building your own with them. So the first one, so wrong start. So this is a very simple pair of data checks to look for participants who started with the wrong race. So in this setup, we have a 5K and 10K race. The 10K is going to start at 8 a.m. The 5K is going to start at 8:15. And for the 10K, we're going to build a 10K wrong start check, which is going to be anyone with a chip difference greater than 15 minutes. If you haven't used chip difference before, it's a great field to report on and to look at. The chip difference is the difference between the chip start time and the clock time for a participant. So if a 10K runner had a chip difference greater than 15 minutes, it would imply that they started with the 5K. And then with data checks, there's the ability to select a single piece of registration data to update. And in this case, we could update participants and move them to the 5K. Whereas with the 5K wrong start check, we're looking for anyone without a chip start who has a read between 8 a.m. and 8:05 a.m., which would imply that they're reading on the start line during the 10K start. The update participant would disqualify these participants as there's a price difference between the races, and while dropping down is okay, moving up in distance is not. This is also a good reminder that if you're deciding if you should move a participant or DQ them, whether through data actions or when acting upon data checks, it's probably a good idea to confirm with the race director what the ruling is for those scenarios so that you're not either automatically moving everyone when there should be a price difference for those. So this is the 10K wrong start. You can see we are selecting the registration event as 10K, and the chip difference is greater than 15 minutes there. And then you can see below for the 5K, we're looking at a scored event is 5K. And do keep in mind there's a difference between scored event and registered event. Scored event, in this case, I might have 5K and 5K youth and 5K no t-shirt, but they would all be in the same scored event. So I'm looking for everyone in that scored event 5K with no chip difference, implying that we have no chip read for them. And that's an important one for this, because if they have that read in the raw read filter on the start line between 8 a.m. and 8:05 a.m., that would imply that they maybe started there, but looking to make sure that chip difference is null means that they weren't just standing by the start and then started later. So when you build data checks or data actions, it is really important to consider all of the possibilities there. You could eliminate this by allowing early chip reads, but then you're also having to keep an eye out on those being used instead. So once you've got a participant in this report, you can see their information here. And again, you can customize that to a certain degree what you see. If you do want to operate on them, you select the checkbox next to them if it's just a single participant, or you can either select all or clear all to customize who you're going to operate on, and then update selected will take the action set in the data check and apply that. So another data check option to build would be split to short. So this data check is for setup where a participant reads on a segment before their minimum segment time, implying that they maybe shorted the course or that the timer should adjust the minimum times for that segment. So the filter is looking for participants who've missed a split but have an unused read at that location. It's a really cool way to use filters because segments are event specific. So a null segment in the Olympic triathlon would also be a null segment in the intermediate tri. So you can use that to find people across multiple different events. So the participant search filter in this case is that the bike is null and that the intermediate triathlon bike is null. So it's covering two different scored events at once here. And then the raw read search filter is that on the location for bike out and in, they have less than 2 occurrences and that the timestamp is not null. So it's important to remember that timestamps, again, I'm just reiterating this because I think that this is the easiest piece to get wrong, but timestamps are any read. So setting a filter on this is important to keep out anyone who's reading as they put their bikes into transition. You might want to say timestamp is not null or timestamp is greater than or equal to some time at which point no one would accidentally be in transition. And again, reminder to not DQ or move participants unless you're sure that that is the way to go. So this is what this would look like. We've got bike chip time is null, meaning that they have not completed this segment, and also that intermediate bike chip time is null, so that we can cover both different distances at once. And then we're looking for the location to be bike out and in, the occurrence count to be less than 2, but to have a timestamp greater than 7 a.m. there. Another very useful one would be the announcer check. And this one is a real lifesaver on the finish line, especially if you are kind of having to evaluate backup data that's coming from volunteers or maybe less than ideal. So this data check is a way to see if someone has a read on the announcer line, but not on the finish line. Most missed reads are caused by everyone's favorite, stopping the watch and covering the bib move. And so those participants will likely have a read on the announcer line if they miss on the finish because they're not covering the bib there. So this is set up by looking for reads on the announcer line and for participants who have a timestamp after 8:20 a.m. on the announcer and whose did not finish is yes. The announcer line's not set up as a segment, which is very useful because you don't have to set up a segment to do this. However, you can extrapolate this out to actually create a check to see what was used on either a backup timing line or on a mobile timing backup stream for participants who missed on the segment. You just set that up as a split, and you would hide that from reports because you don't need to report on that publicly. But it's probably best if you're doing this to create an actual data action that fills in a field so that any later read on the main line that is used incorrectly wouldn't remove them from a report. Just a side note on that, if you have a mainstream and a backup stream, we look at the mainstream first for a valid read for that participant. If there's not one, we look at the backup stream. And if there's a valid one, we'll use that. However, if there is later a valid read on the main line, that would overwrite it. So for example, say I was running and I covered my bib when I finished and didn't read on the chip mats, but someone got me on mobile timing and I ran 25 minutes, and that's used and that's great. But then I walk back over and read on the mats at 35 minutes. That would override the backup read. So if you created something where you had that backup read, not a main read, you could run a check on that using the custom field that the data action fills. And again, just a reminder that timestamps are essential to eliminate reads pre-start. So used equals yes is your friend in these scenarios. But back to the announcer check. For this, it's a pretty simple setup. It's did not finish is yes, and then location is announcer, and timestamp is greater than 820. And again, I put that 820 in there because in this scenario, again, we have our races starting, and we don't want to have a timestamp earlier than that, giving us a false sense that someone read on the announcer and not on the finish. And then last here, we have the course record data check. And this is a really cool way to, at a glance, see if someone has broken a course record. For this, the participant search is pretty important here. Just keep in mind that when we're looking for the women's course record, we shouldn't be considering participants who have registered as male. So the scored event should be set up because the course records are specific to that. In this example, it's a 10K. And then the gender should be selected as well. In this case, it's male. And then the other search in the participant data is for anyone with a chip time under, let's say, 27 minutes and 12 seconds as the course record. Because this feature, because this data check would need to be repeated for other genders and distances, it's also a really good example of using the duplicate feature, which saves a lot of time setting these up. So this data check would be scored event is 10K, gender is male, and 10K entire race clock time is less than 27:12. And then once I've built that, I can just go and duplicate it and change those parameters for women's 10K course record, men's 5K course record, and so on. Once you do create a copy, you'll see that the name also needs to be changed there. But that's really useful because you can just see at a glance whether it's going to be in the upcoming change to look at it up top or just on your home screen. If you got a course record, you can let the organizers know right away and really look knowledgeable and use your expertise to elevate the experience for everyone there.
One other thing
So
on that, sorry, that's really nice we didn't talk about in this session is the ability to print out the results of a data check. So on the export, in the export dropdown, you actually have the ability to create a printout of whoever is in this data check. So your course record reports would be really handy to be able to show, and print out and show to your race organizers the list of any course records you got today.
all right. So now we'll open the floor if there's any questions there. If you are looking to get into data checks and are kind of curious about setting them up, the important thing to keep in mind with data checks is that they're not acting on your data unless you choose to update those participants. So if you have races that you've already scored that you think would be good candidates for playing around with stuff, go back, reopen them, and just start building some data checks for those scenarios. Just a reminder, if you have a 2024, 2020, early 2025 race that you've done, you could build a data check into that when you renew it would carry. Let's see if we can do multiple or nested operators on data checks. We don't have that currently because they're very specific in those selections. We don't have an or operator at this time. And we've got a question, if you could add a column in the results set that stated course record via the data filter created, you could have the action taken on a participant mark that there's a course record there, and you could add that column into your reporting to show that, yes. How do you avoid conflicts on segment minimum, time of day, and gap factor? It's not specifically a data check question, but it actually does relate to that, not completing a segment piece. When you are setting up a segment, one thing to keep in mind is that your gap factor should always allow in the shortest expected distance. So in that scenario with the bike, let's say we have an Olympic try, an intermediate try, and then a beginner triathlon. And let's say it's 21 miles, 14 miles, and 7 miles. That gap factor should account for the 7 mile time, and then you would use the segments, which are scored event specific, to cut that down further and prevent someone from having an outrageous bike time for the 21-mile event.
The same, concept as when you have minimum finish times for a 5K and a 10K that share a common start-finish location, where you're doing two occurrences. The gap factor should be the minimum of 5K or 10K times. So it's really your 5K time. And then you would be able to say, if it's a 10K on the 10K scored event, I want the minimum to be 29 minutes or whatever.
Let's see. Are you seeing any other questions in there, James or Avery?
Just had one from Jim about a specific example where he had an issue. Jim, I'd say send in a help ticket with that and we'll take a look at it. It's hard to say exactly what filter could have caused that not to be selected. But if you send in a help ticket and give us the example of the participant that it's not working as you'd expect it for, we'll be able to take a look. Thanks.
So I just wanted to underscore again what Soren said today. Again, data actions are super powerful. Definitely don't think that you can't use them. Again, it will act on the data as they recovered, and really it's just a matter of making sure you test them ahead of time. But there are definitely scenarios where you want to use data actions because you don't want to have to do all this work manually afterwards. So just have to pick and choose your moments when you're going to use data actions versus data checks. And I think that was the key thing to take away from this today, is that data checks are a great way to start thinking about manipulating data and then figuring out those use cases where you want to now evolve that into an automatic thing called a data action.
If you're not sure if you want to use that data action or not, a really good way to kind of meet halfway on that is to create a custom field that the data action fills in. And then if that's working as expected and making you happy, you can just have the exact same trigger, but rather than fill in that field, have it take the actual registration data edit there. And that's also a really good way to do that, because if you fill in that custom field, you have an easy way to grab all participants acted on and reverse the data action. All right, looks like there's no more questions there. So thanks for hanging out, everybody.